So it is my pleasure to introduce Jay Dolmage, who is the chair of the English department at the University of Waterloo. So I study the rhetoric of games. So I first came across Jay Dolmage's work when studying the rhetoric of Matus, the cunning that happens in the embodied moment. After all, Matus is at the heart of all gameplay. However, in studying Matus, Dolmage shows how those with differences, whether they are neurodivergent or are women of color, have a form of cunning, a Matus that comes from seeing the world differently. In his article, Matus, Mestiza, and Medusa, in his book, Disability Rhetoric, Dolmage also shows that anyone who does not have the ideal body constructed by Western philosophy is part of the monstrous outside, which, of course, actually means that pretty much everyone is disabled in one form or another, and we're all part of that monstrous outside. And with books like Academic Ableism, Disability in Higher Education, and Disabled Upon Arrival, Eugenics, Immigration, and the Construction of Race and Disability, and many other articles and book chapters, Dolmage continues to inspire me as a teacher-scholar to learn from my students as they always bring their own Matus, rare insights into learning and living instead of a deficit. I'm Rebekah Shultz Colby from the writing program at the University of Denver. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm wearing a green sweater with black slacks and I have long brown hair.
And my name's Jay Dolmage. I was so nicely introduced, but I use he, him pronouns. I have kind of short, balding hair. I'm wearing brown glasses. I'm wearing a kind of stripy blue shirt. I've been drinking water, and I'm gesturing through most of this interview.
Hi, my name is Calley, Marotta. I use she, her pronouns, and I am wearing a gray sweater, and I have short brown hair and a chain necklace on. I am a teaching assistant professor here at the University of Denver. I have learned so much, Jay, from seeing you give talks and the sort of way that you center access and are transparent about the strategies that you're using in your talks. So I wondered how we could be more accessible in this video format.
That's interesting. I think maybe we could lay out what we're going to do. Because we do have a plan. And then I think there's lots of stuff we can do afterwards, which I'm sure you're kind of planning just in terms of captioning and a transcript. I have a story about transcripts because I think people think that maybe just captioning is the way to go, but I do a big online course at the University of Waterloo. Lots of students take it, and we did little short videos for kind of each week of the class. They really needed there to be videos, and which kind of mortified me because I don't love being on camera, even though I know I'm on camera right now. But and I don't like looking at myself later. But the nice part, I guess, is that we found out because it was an online course that almost nobody watched the videos, that they read the transcripts, and I think there's lots of good reasons for that. We can kind of go at our own pace with the transcript. We can double check people's references. We can drag and drop chunks of it into our notes and for our own research and other things like that. And so I just think transcripts are great because there's all these other ways that people find to use them that we might not have anticipated. Mm-hmm. And if that means less people are looking at me and just reading, then that's fine too. So, yeah.
Okay, well, that's so helpful and something I've never thought about before. We are going to talk a little bit about some inspiration, what brought you to the things that you study, sure. And then some challenges and changes that you've made pedagogically, some surprises you've had in your research, and then broadly at the university, what barriers and solutions that you're thinking about in terms of students with disabilities. Sure. And finally, if we have time, what you're working on next.
Okay. So, I mean, what brought me to do this, I think I grew up in a small town in Northern Ontario, and when I was the youngest child, and my older brother Matt had disabilities, was disabled, and was, when I was a kid, was bused to a school in another town. And I just remember feeling very kind of like separated from him as part of that. And that's not a great feeling within a family. But my parent, we all left for a year and we went and lived in Vancouver. And when we were there, my brother went to school with my sister and I, and it sort of opened my parents' eyes up that this is something that they needed to fight for. So when we came back, we did fight for that, and it was a prominent case in Canada. It's Dolmage versus Muskoka Board of Education. It went all the way to the Supreme Court of Appeal, and we lost. We didn't give up. We actually moved to another town, to another school board where my brother could go to school with us. And my earliest experiences with education were all the things that were great about that and all the things that were really hard about that. At a time when most kids with disabilities were institutionalized or were in segregated schools or segregated classrooms. So I kind of grew up through that and through all the connections that we made as a family with other families. And eventually one of those other families, the Eatons, they were successful. And that set up a precedent in Canada where students have the right to go to their neighborhood school with their sisters and their neighbors and friends. And that's a big deal. Doesn't always come true still. I mean, there are arguments made that pull students away from that, and resources are pooled in the wrong places, etc. As I moved up through school, like I said, I saw all that was really good about inclusion, and I saw all the ways that it was difficult. And then when I got into university, I kind of looked around and I realized, well, this is very, very different. And it definitely was a big part of the lens that I brought to the things that I studied. So, and you talk about the Métis, Mestiza, Medusa article, like when I was looking at the history of rhetoric, I just kind of refused to believe that there weren't disabled people at the center of it, and there were. I learned that from people like Kate Ronald, who wrote, who did some of the primary research in the history of rhetoric, and sort of refusing to believe that women were, not central. And so, in any case, that was sort of brought to my research first before I had any kind of agency or ability to advocate for the ways that I saw that higher education was this really distinctly ableist place. And so then that's been, in a way, what I've tried to do, and to stay connected in some ways with some of those people that I was close with as I was growing up, but also in sort of looking at universities and at higher education and saying, this can be different. It has to be different. Yeah.
So then what inspired you to study, is it Métis? Okay.
Métis is.
It is
yeah.
Métis. Okay.
Yeah.
Métis, or the cunning that happens in the embodied moment.
So it started with Hephaestus, who is the kind of who's a Greek god. He's a god of metallurgy, and he's depicted as disabled. So he's depicted as having feet that kind of point in different directions. There's a kind of very famous image that's been recovered of him in a chariot that he built that looks very much like a wheelchair.
So is that real? Because when I first saw that, I was like, that's Photoshopped.
It's a phase painting.
It's really amazing.
It is really incredible, and I could describe it more, but it would take so much time, but it's so fun.
It's in his article.
Yeah, it's a really cool chariot. Anyway, it has so many features, actually. It's really cool. But that then led me to some of this work. There was a kind of metaphorical sense given to his body, which sounds patronizing in a way, but it was very, I don't know, that was kind of how ideology and philosophy were kind of built out of some of these myths. Were sometimes bodily metaphors, and this idea of his feet being pointed sideways became a kind of metaphor for his ability to think laterally, and that was what allowed him to invent metallurgy, and to build tools, weapons, things like the chariot, was that ability to think differently and that ability to move side to side and be cunning, and that is Métis, and then Métis as a kind of like force or a way of being or thinking or an embodied way of being and thinking was also embodied through a Greek goddess, and there's a whole story about, and there's a way in which the Greek myths basically eat that history, and kind of take away the central role that goddess had in mythology. The interesting thing, I think, to say about Hephaestus, if I could kind of encapsulate it, is to say, I think we believe, because we live in a culture that's still pretty ableist and pretty, in which disabled people still have to fight for basic rights. We believe that that's probably the way that society has always been. And so a lot of the ways that we even interpret ancient Greece is this idea that, babies were thrown out, and, we import so much ableism into the past. And the interesting thing about Hephaestus was not that I found him, but that he was a major Greek god, and there were periods in Athens in which he was the primary god, when the society needed to rebuild itself after war and needed to kind of reinforce this message that all bodies could be productive. He was the main, that his temple, the festival of Hephaestus, those were the big events. So it's easy to sort of say, oh, disability is always, we've got a week or we've got a day for it. No, it was central and it was celebrated. And that, to me, matters a lot, because we do have an ableist way of looking at history, but also it matters a lot because it means we can see things differently and we can create things differently for now.
So what do you see as the biggest challenges universities face in accommodating neurodiverse students?
That's interesting, because I think... to start with, I think universities have no idea how many neurodivergent students they have. And there's a kind of convenience there in really kind of drastically, in the kind of assumption that this is not a place that neurodivergent students would want to be or are. And that's just not true. The vast majority of students with disabilities in higher education, their universities will never know about their disabilities. That's, the data says that's about 75%. So you have neurodivergent students in your classrooms right now. Because they may not be seeking accommodations in the traditional way, I think there's a lot of good reasons why they may not be. The kind of accommodations that we have generally tend to be really narrow. So 75% of the accommodations that offered are the same thing, which is just extended time on tests and exams. And that's helpful. We should keep doing that. But it's become this unbelievably large industry. Like, it's such a production. A mid-sized university is giving tens of thousands of extended time accommodations every year. And Office of Disability Services, who are doing good work, so much of their time and effort is just taken up in like scheduling rooms and working on Canvas or Blackboard or Learn or whatever to add time to exams. And it's just this, timed exams, there's no good reason to give them anyway, and I won't get into that in too great of detail because I could talk about it for too long. But we're just putting all of the energy around disability into this one thing that's like stuck in this Fordist, like a factory model of education from almost 100 years ago. If you look on the homepage of a university, students are pictured, they're not pictured sitting taking exams. They're pictured doing all kinds of hands-on learning, experiential learning, community-based learning. They're working with robots and technology and and all this exciting stuff. But we're not figuring out how to make sure that all students can be included in doing that. Instead, the only way we're working on inclusion is just in giving 30 more minutes or 45 more minutes on these instruments that really actually also construct teachers as just assessment machines, which I don't think we should want. I guess, like, not to get into it, not to go too far overboard, but I think we're also in an era where I don't know that the general public really likes universities. We're having an issue, a moment right now where a crisis maybe, and so it does not do us any good to construct ourselves as places that rank and test and kind of like quantify people's intelligence. And we've never had an unbiased way of doing that, and that should not be the future of education. So to me, I think I could talk forever about the challenges that are faced, but I think we have to take a harm reduction approach to begin with, and we need to assess less. We need to then be able to start connecting with students more to know what they actually want. I was talking this morning with the people at the law school. There's really only one major study that's ever been done that asked disabled students in a large numbers what they would actually want in terms of accommodations. Mm-hmm. That's wild. And if you go on Google Scholar and you search disability plus university, whatever, use your search terms carefully, but all that you'll find is research around time testing and whether it's fair or not, and how long the extensions should be, and are students faking disabilities to get time test and I swear to God, you'll see page after page after page after page of that stupid research. Sorry, anyone who's doing that research, but and it's just taken over. And then actually, I know I'm getting on a soapbox here, but it also then constructs all disabled students as potential cheaters. Mm-hmm. Potentially faking. Mm-hmm. And that has overwhelmed the discussion, and so we need to change the discussion pretty drastically. I think the place to start is to say whether they get accommodations or not. You have students who are very diverse learners. You have neurodiverse students, you have autistic students, you have students with anxiety, you have students with learning disabilities. Those students may not seek the channels that we've always had for them. There's probably some very good reasons why they won't do that. We can't make them do that. So what can we do? How can we design our classes? How can we start even one thing at a time each term to start making things more accessible? Because I guess the other thing to say is if there's 75% of students are not seeking accommodations, we have no idea how many students we're losing, but I think it's a lot.
So I think one reason that educators sometimes feel intimidated by making their classrooms more accessible is it feels like they need to do everything at once, or it feels like some people know how to do this and other people don't know how to do this, and that limits everybody's access. So I wondered, from a place of humility, I'm always feeling humble when I learn new things about how I can make the classroom more accessible. What changes have you made and are you still making and learning to center access in your class?
Sure. So I think one of the ways that I approach this is to say we have actually made a lot of, universities have actually changed a lot over the past 6 years, wildly actually. And there's some irony there. I talked about that one major study that asked students with disabilities what they wanted. Well, what they wanted was basically asynchronous learning. They wanted access to their instructors and course notes and slides and things like that outside of the class, outside of the 50 minutes. You know what I mean? That's not actually a lot to ask for. The students were told for years that they couldn't have that. And then we had a pandemic, and we had to move everything online, and we made all that available to everybody. And it's a huge difference because it means you can be present in class because you can get the notes later, right? That's a big deal. And yet we were saying no. We were turning, there's too much of what we do that is a series of 50-minute races full of information within 16-week races full of information, which is nobody would say is a good way to learn or retain or apply.
Yeah, I don't think anyone learns well that way.
It's a terrible way to learn. And so asynchronous learning is a big thing, and it's just about time. It's just about giving people, if you want people to participate, you can't expect them to participate in the next 5 seconds all the time. Doesn't mean some people will, sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But it's a much better way to give some time for reflection, right? Some time to actually engage with the stuff. It's time to talk to other people about it. So one of the biggest things is just making available what we do in class outside of class. It sounds simple. It is pretty simple. And I think we are all actually pretty much doing it now. So that's a big deal because we said we wouldn't for so long. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing I think is that we should share the labor of access. So one of the biggest changes that I've made in the last decade or so is I took participation, and so if you give a participation grade in class, a lot of people do, I used to give like 30% for participation, and I would just kind of guess. Like I'd have all the rest of the grades in, and I'd be like, oh, who talked a lot in class? Which is wildly unfair way to assess anybody. And it also only meant that some people could succeed because there's not enough space for everybody to, So I've completely changed participation. What I do is I'm open to students telling me how they're going to participate. And every term I learn new things. So a lot of those things are ways to create access to course material and discussion and engagement for other people. Shared class notes. I had a student one time who took minutes for every class.
Yeah.
It was incredible because then you get an email that says, I wasn't in class, what did I miss? Well, here's the minutes. Right? So, and that does not take away space from anybody else. All that it does is create something that's useful to everybody, right? And so I keep being open-minded about that, and I keep learning that students should be given some responsibility to build access for others in the class, that they can help caption, that they can describe images, that when they to the limits of their abilities, right? Or there's some other way for them to create, to build that as a community asset. So that's another thing that I hope takes some pressure off. But I believe also entirely what you said. I think like what used to be a credit hour 30 years ago has exploded. And the amount of work that we're expected, that instructors do, has increased a lot too, for lots of good reasons. We know what it's like to get a pile of 8-page essays, right? We want to give really good, thick feedback on everything, but it's unbelievably exhausting, right? So the one thing that I say is it's okay to take some things away, right? And that may not be taking the thing away, but take away the assessment piece, right? Have some, if you're somebody who does have tests, consider making them non-timed to begin with, but also consider making some of them ungraded, right? So that you have the time and resources to do something different, right? To build some accessibility and to begin transcribing or creating transcripts for all of your lectures. Doing that takes a lot of work, right? You should only do that if you can take something else out. Right? Yeah. But taking something else out might actually increase access too. Yeah. We shouldn't think that everything we do is going to be an addition. People who talk about universal design, they talk about it as +1 thinking. Just add one accessibility feature in per term, and then 3 or 4 years you've got a lot. And you can reuse a lot of these things, right? Once you've done these things one time, you get much better at it, but it helps you. Having a transcript of a lecture means you have it, you can change it, right? You can add new material, take things out that didn't work, whatever. But I also think it should be -1 thinking, and that when we add new things in, we should give ourselves permission to take things out. And my thing would be assess less.
I really want to underline how important it feels to highlight the benefits to instructors in doing this work, that it doesn't have to be more is more. It doesn't have to be you need to work harder. And I think just recently have I started to share that labor with my students, which is such great modeling of interdependence that we need them to be that's okay, to be supporting access for the whole class as well as themselves and us.
Something like shared note taking is really important, not just because we're sharing, it's very important for that reason. It builds a community, it builds a sense that we should be able to count on one another. I was saying this to the law school earlier. So in that model in which we're testers and assessors, I actually don't think we're preparing students for the real world at all.
Right.
It's a joke that I often say, but nobody walks into an engineering firm and says, put your pencils down, whatever bridge you designed is one we're building tomorrow. And that's good because we would have really bad bridges, right? We need good bridges. But the point being, I think reflection collaboration, how to help other people. Like, these are things you need in the real world. These are things that make great communities, right? That also make great bridges. And we're not doing anybody a service by teaching students to be competitive with one another. We're not doing them a service. The other piece that I often say about the accommodations piece is, if the accommodations are matched up to that competitive world, we're also not teaching people how to learn about themselves as learners very well. The accommodations that we all might need in a career are not going to be extended time on tests and exams. There are going to be accommodations around memory, right? There are going to be accommodations around communication. So then we should be working on those kinds of accommodations to learning here, or else we're missing that huge opportunity. And people are going to have to figure it out all over again. I will say the majority of students that I talk to at post-graduation, 5-10 years later, even the students who are in co-op right now at the university that I work at, they say it's much easier to get accommodations, and really good ones, and a wide range of them, in their workplace than it is at their university. There's already a mismatch there. I don't think that that's universal, but it tells you something. Yeah. That's not even to say that those accommodations are always good. It's just how simple and narrow it is that we're doing it.
What is co-op?
So co-op is like work integrated learning. So you take classes for a term, and then you go and get paid to work for 4 months, and then you come back. And so you're working in a job that looks like what you want to have for your career. Cool. Which is great, because then you find out you didn't like it. Yeah. It's better to find out you don't like it.
Oh, yes. I wish I had co-op.
Yeah. I mean, it has its downsides too, in that I think it does overwrite some of the learning with career orientation, which isn't always good. You couldn't have told me when I was 18 to do that. I wasn't at university to make money ever. I mean, I was pretty naive, but I really wasn't there to get a career. I wanted to just learn everything.
You picked the right career.
That's right. I just stayed there. I never left. Yeah. The most common questions I get are not really questions, but assumption. There's this assumption that floats around that there are more disabled students than ever, more disabilities than ever, and more wild accommodations than ever. And I think so it's just so important for me to show the research and the data that shows that that's not the case. That's a really popular thing to get picked up in the Chronicle of Higher Education or in popular media, is this idea that universities are coddling disabled students, et cetera. And I just think it could actually not be further from that. And the question never comes as anything but a single anecdote. And so it's so important to have the research that shows that that's not the case. In terms of things at a university, in terms of future work, I'm working on a book that's about time and higher education. And so it is about the history of credit hours, and it is about why 16 weeks, and why 50-minute courses, and just sort of some of the regimes of time from the clock. Oh my gosh, there's a clock. I can actually see a clock tower. I have a whole obsession now with clock towers, right? University clock towers as these kind of central organizing. Anyway, so it's probably pretty dorky, and it's not done, so I shouldn't even be talking about it. But I chose to answer that question so that I'll feel more guilty, and then I'll work on it more. Yeah. Because then I'll look like a fool if I talked about a book and it never happens.
Well, it seems as we're both going, and then we see the clock tower, that...
It's wild that there is a clock tower right there.
I think there's something to that,
maybe.
For sure.
Yeah,
yes, and the urgency around time and testing and everything.
And then I think one major thing, it's not the only thing, it's not the most important thing, but universities need to think about actually having disability policies for staff and faculty.
Yes.
I think it's one of the most important things, and we're not in an era where that's going to be easy. But it's been far too long, and most universities do not even have a policy. And so staff and faculty, the folks who do a lot of care work, a lot of disabled, I said you have disabled students in your classes, you
Yeah.
work with disabled people,
Yeah.
they're doing great work, but they're up against it, and their confidentiality is not safe.
Right.
The funding that would come that would fund very simple accommodations for folks to be able to have really fruitful careers are not there, and I think we can't fix the whole university unless we make sure that the people who are here to do a lot of the work are protected and have their rights. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been delightful. I told myself I wasn't going to take notes, which is hilarious. Because
You are very much a note taker.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I, learn new things. So I'm grateful.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks for chatting. Sorry I was hitting the table so much.
Thank you.